Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for braving the elements, and welcome to the annual Friends of the Lake District Kirby Lecture. My name's Jeremy Smith and I'm Head of Campaigns and Engagement. First things first, just some things to be aware of. We have 3 fire exits in this room. The way that you came in, one on the side here and one out the back through that way in the event of emergency. We will, during the course of the evening, be taking some photographs. That's purely for our own publicity to talk about this event afterwards. If for any reason you don't want to be caught in any photograph, just let one of the members of staff know and we'll ensure that you're not in any of them. Finally, please do ensure that your phones are either switched off or in silent mode so that we can all have the full benefit of the event. So I know that many of you here today will be members of Friends of the Lake District, but for those of you who may not know our work so well, we were founded in 1934, initially with a goal of securing the establishment of a national park for the Lake District, a goal that was achieved in 1951. And throughout our what is now more than 90 years of history, we have blocked conifer plantations, we have secured a speed limit on Windermere. We have ensured that electricity wires are put underground, and we have acted against inappropriate developments such as that proposed in Rowan Head for a large holiday lodge complex. And we don't always win throughout these different battles, and we've seen that most recently in the Elterwater case, but we certainly don't give up, and we won't be giving up. A large part of our work comprises connecting people to the beautiful landscape of Cumbria through hedge laying events, dark skies festivals, walks and talks across our land, dotted across Cumbria. And today's event is in many ways an extension of that. It's about involving people in the evolution of our work and helping to shape our work on some of the most important issues affecting Cumbria. A reminder too, of course, that we're only able to do this thanks ultimately to the generosity of the late Mr. Lewis Kirby, who gave us a series of donations that have funded this event over several years, as well as supported some of our landscape recovery work. You'll all know, of course, that today's event is focused on tourism, whether the limits of the current model of tourism have been reached, whether a different form of tourism is possible, and what that might look like. And as in previous years, although we call this still the Kirby Lecture, it doesn't take the form precisely of a lecture. We're having more of a panel discussion, and we're very lucky to have a highly esteemed and expert and diverse panel with us. Nearest to me, we have Councillor Louise Dunn, the Mayor of Keswick. Next to her is Gavin Capstick, CEO of the Lake District National Park Authority. At the end, we have Michael Hill, CEO of Friends of the Lake District itself. And next to Michael, between Michael and Gavin, we're very lucky to have Dame Fiona Reynolds, former Director General of the National Trust, whom some of you will remember from last year's event. Fiona will be posing a series of questions to the panel, first of all, to provide some context and to frame the discussion, if you like, and we'll then be opening up the debate to questions from the floor. And we very much hope that it will be a rich, interactive and fruitful discussion. So without further ado, over to you, Fiona.
Thank you very much indeed, and welcome. It's really lovely to be here again. I've known Friends of the Lake District for a very long time. I've been a member, I think, for about 45 years, so I hope all of you here are members tonight. I'm really looking forward to this debate. And it is going to be a debate, and I'm going to bring you in, so I'm looking for hands and for people, if I can see just about, if you want to say something after about a few questions with the panel. So please be ready with your questions, with your comments, with your challenges. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. But tourism is one of those subjects that I think we probably all have a view on. We all know that it's described, isn't it, as the goose that lays the golden egg, but we also know it brings challenges, and I'm sure we'll hear about those tonight. We're not just talking about a national park that's existed since 1951, we're also talking about a World Heritage Site with global obligations, which are incredibly challenging to meet. We all know that tourism starts from love, actually, a love that I'm sure we all feel for the Lake District, and we know that the many people who come here share that passion, but it's also a spectrum that can start with love but end with overuse and really big challenges, and I'm sure we'll hear all about them. But we also know that there are tools to help us manage tourism, and that's going to be very much the theme tonight. What might work? What are the opportunities we've got? Or actually, are we talking about something even more fundamental, about changing the nature of tourism in this world, which is actually very different from the world in which the National Park was designated in 1951. So that's going to be some of the framing for today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panel, and I'm going to start with you, Louise, because you sit right in the middle of this extraordinary landscape in Keswick. It's a town that I've been to many times. Everybody loves Keswick, but tell us what tourism is like for the residents of Keswick.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know Keswick very well, it's a town with 5,000 permanent residents, and the population can be quadrupled or more during busy tourist times. Tourism for us is good and bad. I think one of the things I always find slightly tiresome about these debates is that you're either for tourism or against tourism. So I'm going to try and be in the middle here somewhere. So, but obviously I'm going to start with the negatives, right?
Start with the negatives. Go on, let's get them out.
We're here to talk about a tourist tax, and one of the reasons, so Keswick Town Council is very supportive of having some kind of tourist levy. We don't call it a tourist tax. Mainly because our infrastructure is terribly under strain. So if you have a town of 5,000 permanent residents, the council tax receipts aren't that high, and a lot of the public services are paid for through council tax. So we have this bizarre situation where the local residents are currently subsidising the tourist industry, because we're the ones paying to empty the bins, fix the roads, and all of the other things that need to be done when you have a lot of people in a space. So I think that's one of the negative things, because there just isn't money to do as much street cleaning as we'd like, and it puts a burden on us. It also has a bad effect on the tourist experience as well, because there's very few public toilets. The bins can be overflowing. There's a lot of dogs. I love dogs, but there's a lot of them. And, you know, a lot of the national funding mechanisms are such that it's your money and how much you're given. Is that my hair? The money and how much you're given is dictated by what your population level is. So we keep on being told that we don't have enough people in Keswick for a swimming pool. Go the pool. Which is mad, because the town is rammed, and on a rainy day we need a pool. But because the computer says no, we get caught in between this sort of this. So the other thing that we struggle with talking about the pool is lack of community spaces. So we don't have a pool at the moment. Our youth club is in temporary accommodation. Our older pensioners club is in a rickety old building. The library isn't great, and we really struggle because all of the good spaces have been bought. So the community feels a bit poor in terms of things that you can go to for free. So we're currently trying to revamp our play area in Fitz Park. If anyone wants to donate, please do. Because it's the only free space to take your kids if you're local. And this isn't necessarily a rich community. There are rich people that live in Keswick, but there's a lot of people who are on fairly low wages. Sorry, this is a rather long answer.
Well, let's turn to Gavin now, because we'll come back, I'm sure, to Keswick, but you look after the wider park. So what are the issues in the wider park? Because Keswick's a bit of a honeypot, isn't it? People stream in, and clearly some of the problems that Louise has described. But what does it feel like across the whole park?
probably start from a slightly different place and explore some of the positives as well, because let's not forget that one of the special qualities, one of the reasons we are designated as a national park is a long-standing history of tourism and outdoor activity. It makes an enormous contribution to the Cumbrian economy. I'm not going to go into bore everyone with economic facts and figures across the course of the evening. I think it can be taken as read, the contribution it makes to the economy in Cumbria and the Lake District. But that contribution goes further than the direct jobs. About 30% of the income that's generated through tourism supports the supply chain. It supports plumbers, it supports builders, accountants, electricians. It's a really central part of the economy here in Cumbria. I think it also helps drive a sense of pride and that sense of place. It certainly puts us on the map, and it's certainly every day when you see the visitors arrive in Cumbria in the Lake District, it reminds me how fortunate and lucky we are as local residents to live in such a wonderful place. It can provide services as well that frankly wouldn't be here. It certainly puts strain on some public services, and we'll return to that, I'm sure, across the course of the evening. But it provides services as well, the restaurants, the cinemas, even the scale of public transport wouldn't be the same without our visitor economy. And crucially, from my point of view, from the national park perspective, it brings great value to the nation. So it helps the whole nation connect with nature, connect with the outdoors, develop an understanding and appreciation for the environment, and hopefully inspires them to look after nature and to stay active when they go home. That's a really invaluable benefit that it brings, not necessarily to local communities, but to the whole nation. And it supports health and well-being, and that's whether you're local or coming from further afield. The benefits of access to nature on your mental health and well-being and your physical well-being are well proven. In terms of some of the challenges that it inevitably brings, I think one of the things I'd flag, I don't know if Louise picked up on it, certainly in my view, it rather regrettably adds further pressure to the local housing market and distorts a housing market that's got issues right across the country, but certainly within the Lake District that gets further distorted by issues around short-term lets, around second homes, and that's something that's acutely felt by local communities. It puts pressure on local services, certainly the funding formulas. Louise is entirely right to say funding formulas for local services are largely determined by your resident population and not your visitor population, so that certainly puts a sense of strain there. And the highly seasonal nature of the visitor economy that we've got, that I think we'd all like to address, means that it can put strains on communities as well. You get large numbers of visitors all going to the same points at the same places at the same points in the year. That inevitably leads to, I hear it when I get out and about meeting parish councils and local residents, you can start to feel like a stranger in your own village, in your own town, and a little bit overwhelmed, and I think that's something that we need to address. I think some of that's driven by the change in demographic and audience that we've seen post-COVID, which is really, really welcome, and I'm sure we'll elaborate on that as we go through the course of the evening.
Not entirely welcome when they leave.
I'll pick a point there. I think the visitors are welcome. It's the behaviours we need to challenge. It should be a park for all. And I've no truck making that argument. I really believe in national parks for everyone. It's the behaviours that we would need to challenge. But what we have seen with that shift in demographics and shift in audience is perhaps a different behaviour, not the sort of behaviours that we'll end up talking about in greater detail later on, but they're more active and they're exploring parts of the Lake District that weren't explored by traditional audiences. And as far as we do have an infrastructure in the Lake District to support the visitor economy, that might not be the case in all the places that those new audiences are reaching, and that, I think, puts some pressure on local communities.
And it is patchy. I do remember being on High Style probably like 20 years ago and hadn't seen anyone all day, just walking actually with one other person, so I did see one other person. And I came down to be told that the police had been stopping people coming off the M6 because the Lake District was full. And I'm sure we've all heard that, this idea, because Ambleside was at gridlock and, one or two other. So, you can still, thankfully, find beautiful places. But, Mike, you've done a report, you've looked into the causes and frustrations that tourism can cause, as well as we've heard the benefits. But there are one or two things that actually haven't been mentioned yet that cause pressure. Tell us a bit more about those.
Yeah, so this was a report we put out last year called Who Pays for the Lake District, and it was intended to explore some of the pressures that tourism sustains on the national park, but also look at then some of the answers from around the world, some case studies, which hopefully we can get to talk about today. Some of the unintended impacts of the 18 million people who visit every year include things we've all experienced, like clogged roads, irresponsible parking, emissions. Louise mentioned communities being hollowed out. We've just done another piece of research around kind of under the radar growth of tourism accommodation. And one of the interesting stats we came up with was that in central Keswick, there are now more than twice as many self-catering tourist accommodations than there are residential dwellings. So, you know, that really is hard for a community to sustain. And some of those are big Airbnbs. Some of the guest houses have flipped to become party houses where people turn up, spend 3 days making a noise, celebrating, and then bugger off. And then the next day, another family comes.
To use a technical term.
And does exactly the same thing. But the people who live around them, people who live in that neighbourhood are really hammered. So it's the unintended impact of tourism, the kind of unmonitored impacts of tourism, which I think we need to talk about, and ways that we can mitigate that.
Yeah. And Louise, we're going back to what would be good in Keswick. You know, when things are working for tourism, what are the benefits that are brought for you? So what does good look like in this space?
Balance, I think, for me. And it's around, because we love visitors, and it's clearly our local economy depends enormously on the tourism trade, but there's also, because there's so many. I mean, you know, Gavin was saying it's great for plumbers and electricians. He's probably never tried to get a plumber or an electrician recently because you can't get one. And you know, so we're very reliant on. So it's good, and people in the main are great, right? It's just around. For me, it's the infrastructure. So parking, nuisance behaviour. You know, we were just talking about the Airbnbs. We started a holiday let nuisance reporting scheme. Which is quite good, because I was saying earlier, I used to live next to quite a big Airbnb, and used to regularly sort of go around there in my pyjamas and shout at them because it would be loud at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's very stressful for the neighbours. And actually the reporting scheme's been really good in a couple of ways, because it means that we're holding the owners accountable. We're also providing the owners with guidance on how to manage their properties, because some of them aren't doing that. And it also helped the National Park planning team, because when they get planning applications for switch from a B&B to an Airbnb, they turned one down recently because it was in a residential area and it would have had a detrimental impact on the... Because initially we said this is a problem, and they went, prove it. So we went, all right then. So we did.
I'm sure we're more polite than that.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
That was the gist of it. We don't believe you. Prove it. So we did. And I think, you know, that's an example of what a community can do to actually say, hang on a minute. Sorry, you asked me to say what things are good.
Yeah, but it's very interesting though that actually it quickly turns back to the pressures on you. So I mean, I think this is the reality, isn't it, today, that something that should be good turns into a nightmare of varying proportions.
And in the main, it is good, right? So you know, I'm here to set out my stall, as it were. I think we need tourism, but also it needs to be in balance with the local community. So we need enough housing, we need workers because a lot of restaurants aren't open all the time because there's no one to work in them, because there's nowhere for anyone to live.
Well, housing is really one of the major issues, I think. So we're going to talk about some of the tools that are available, might be available. Sadly, we were going to hear from Edinburgh this evening, but the trains got cancelled from Edinburgh, so we're not going to hear about that. But there are lots of places which are beginning to explore tourism taxes of various kinds, controls. I mean, obviously, there are planning controls which you can use here, which not all local authorities can actually, the switch of use, but also controls through your management, through the Lake District National Park has rangers and others who can help. But let's focus on this new idea of taxes, whether it's on vehicles or whether it's on beds and managing. And I think there are lots of examples in your report. Can you just give us a highlight of some of the places that have started to do this and whether they're working or not?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. One that does seek to solve the housing problem actually is Edinburgh. We would have heard from Ellen, who hasn't been able to make it here tonight, but from July Of course, Edinburgh is in Scotland, and so Scotland and Wales at the moment have the powers to levy an overnight charge. England doesn't currently have that power. So from July 2026, there'll be a 5% levy charged on the first 5 consecutive nights that you stay in anywhere in Edinburgh, not just hotels, but campsites, boats. If you stayed in a camper van, you'd still have to pay. All paid accommodation. They're looking to raise £50 million a year from it, and it's going to be divvied up amongst several different things: parks and outdoor spaces, visitor management, city operations, culture and events, but also paying for affordable housing. So that because they have similar pressures in Edinburgh, because it's a beautiful place to buy a home or buy a second home or buy an Airbnb. So they also haven't got enough plumbers and plasterers living locally. So they are using some of this money to create affordable housing for locals. Another great example, that this is in our report, every year, every summer, I go to a beautiful place off the Atlantic coast of France called the Ile de Ré. And you get onto the island over a bridge, which makes it very easy for them to charge you when you're driving on. That money goes to the local parishes, who can then spend it on what they like. They decide, quite a lot of them, to spend it on affordable housing, so they buy up places that would become holiday homes. They also support local economies, so oyster beds, salt manufacture, vineyards. So that's another example of, and free electric buses shuttling all around the island all the time, and an incredible network of cycle routes. So what tends to happen is you may drive onto the island, pay your bridge toll, but you park your car and you leave it there for 2 weeks because you're cycling everywhere and taking free electric buses. I am not dreaming, it does work. I stay there every summer. So it is possible.
Yeah, and actually I was hearing the other day about Orkney wanting to put a £5 levy on every single cruise ship passenger who lands on Orkney, and they are really struggling. These are places, though, with one point of entry. Actually, Edinburgh's not, I agree. But could such a thing work in the Lake District, do we think? You're supportive, aren't you, Louise?
Well, they've managed to do congestion charge in London, so I don't see why some kind of vehicle levy isn't possible. I mean, it will probably might be too expensive to do, I don't know. But we'll leave that to the people with big brains to work out. But I mean, it would be great, because, you know, on the tourist side, a lot of people have camper vans these days. Anyone got a camper van out there?
Definitely. Handful.
Now, so everyone's being encouraged into their camper vans. Now, you come to Keswick, and there's hardly any facilities. There are some campsites, but they're always full. So they all park at Lakeside Car Park. And you're not allowed to park there, everyone, by the way. And there are no toilets, or there is a toilet, but they don't use them, and they empty their cassettes. And it's causing a big pollution issue in that area. Plus, the theatre, when people come for the matinee, the car park's full of camper vans, so people can't get in, can't park to go to the... So it causes this big knock-on. So that's one of the things that a tourist tax could pay for. We could have black and brown waste disposal points, more of them. And you go to Scotland, they do it. They have airs. We just don't seem to have that kind of infrastructure, and we've been talking a lot with the local council about creating it, but there seems like there's no funding, and this is where I think a tourist levy could be used to improve things for tourists and also for locals, because it means you won't find a man pooing behind a bush when you're walking the dog. Sorry, everyone.
Not nice, yeah. But do you prefer, I mean, even though it's all quite theoretical at the moment, but how do you feel about a bed tax, or how do you feel about a vehicle tax? I mean, is there a big kind of difference between them? Can they both work?
I'm not a technical expert, but my instinct is that a bed tax isn't very popular with our locals who have B&Bs and hotels.
Is very popular.
Isn't
very popular. Why isn't it very popular?
Because they believe it would cause, I mean, I can't talk for everybody, so, but this is, when I talk to people, they're worried about that. The other problem is that we've got too many vehicles in the national park, so if you actually tax something that's part of the big problem, because we want people to come and stay over, but what's happening at the moment is There's just, I call it the sort of boothsometer. You know, if you can get into Booth's car park, it means that it's a good day, but for most of the summer you can't.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of vehicles, and if there was some way of taxing the vehicles, that would be really helpful. And if you would go down Borrowdale Valley, that's a bit more expensive than coming to Keswick and using the car park. You know, something like that that could be moderated to encourage the right behaviours and also fund more infrastructure to encourage those behaviours further.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I
really
was thinking.
interesting. And Gavin, if this would happen, the Lake District National Park would probably be really central to how it would be implemented, what worked. How do you feel about these possible options?
Interesting use of words there. How do I feel about it? Because I'll start with a big caveat. The Park Authority does not have a formal position on visitor levies, on congestion charging.
But
just because I sit here in a blue shirt, we shouldn't take this as the board's position on something.
But Gavin himself might have a
I'm happy to give some personal views.
Good.
Shut up shop entirely. No. I think you have to start with what problems that you're trying to solve and understand the limitations of the vehicles, no pun intended, that we've got in place at the moment. Because in reality, a congestion charge won't solve a lot of the problems because you are much more limited in how you spend that funding. It has to be spent on transport infrastructure and transport support.
Is that legally? Is that because of the way
That's
it's
the
under the
legislation,
Transport
the way
Act?
that's
Yes, Transport Act 2000 ring fences the income to be used for transport related mobility. So yes, footpath repairs. You know, you can quite broad definition.
It can be broad, but it won't solve our housing crisis. It won't go towards parks. It won't go to, and then I think the important point to stress, and I don't want to sound entirely against any of these ideas. Just the reason that we can seem hesitant at times is you end up trying to look at the bigger picture realistically. At the end of the day, any form of levy, and certainly a congestion charge, it's a means to an end. It's not the end itself, in my view. What you're trying to achieve is modal shift, moving people away from their vehicles and towards public transport. And in urban areas, in Edinburgh, in London, in Birmingham, that's a lot more straightforward to do for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they have pre-existing public transport networks that are set up to cope with scale. They are bordering on mass transit systems. In London, they are entirely mass transit systems. You have a viable and genuine alternative, and certainly they use the congestion charge to improve provision, but there is a viable and genuine alternative, and it worries me that if we can't provide that genuine alternative, then it becomes a barrier to entry to people's national parks. So we have to address that.
Can I just jump in there? Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it depends what level you pitch the charge at. So if you're talking about £2 or £3, and with 18 million visitors a year, we could generate a chunk of change from just charging £2 or £3, then that's not a barrier to entry. I think there are models where the visitor vehicle charge is a form of income rather than a barrier to entry.
The other problem that you have is, because I do want to design a genuinely, and we're going to have this problem however you pay for it, by the way, is designing a genuinely functional public transport system that can really drive modal shift. Again, is a lot more straightforward in an urban area where you've got a hub and spoke model with people going in rather than people coming and dispersing right across the Lake District.
But there have been some experiments with minibuses and things in the lakes, and actually I know Snowdonia very well, Aruri, I must call it now, where the Sherpa, there's just no parking around the access.
And this is exactly where I would be. I think my personal view at this point is a park-wide blanket charge is a rather blunt instrument, to put it frankly. And I know no one's suggesting this, it can be variable across the year, it can be seasonal. But in reality, we don't have year-round congestion and year-round traffic problems. They are very seasonal, and they're very sensitive in terms of their location. It's hotspot locations. I think the real answer to transport provision probably falls more in valley by valley and village by village type solutions. And we've had some really successful trials in the Lake District. What's been going on in Wasdale, what's been going on in Ullswater, they to me point a way forward. Now, I'm not saying that actually in the long term a form of vehicle charging at that local level or some financial incentive to change behaviours wouldn't be beneficial, but I think the idea of a congestion charge park-wide I find a little bit harder to reconcile myself to personally.
Can I just say though, I think if you expect so what's happened in Ullswater is brilliant, but it happened because of the brains in that valley and frankly the wallets in that valley. The businesses have co-funded something. Now it's magical thinking to expect that's going to sprout up in every valley by itself.
No,
we need strategic amounts of cash to be spent from the top.
I think the approaches will be different in every valley. I don't think it necessarily needs strategic imposition from the above. Certainly what we learn in Wasdale as the trial goes on, it's absolutely vital to take the community with you and get them involved in the co-design of that process.
But where's the money going to come from?
The money there, again, I haven't said for 1 minute that I wouldn't be opposed to some form of carrot and stick type approach. One of the things we've struggled to get take up on in Wasdale on the shuttle bus that we've run there is getting the funding in place to drive the capacity, because you really need those shuttle buses running. In an ideal world, speaking as a family man, I want them every 15 minutes. I don't want them every hour and not even every 30 minutes. So we certainly need to more funding to increase the frequency. But the other part of the dynamic is you probably need to be more assertive in limiting the unauthorised parking up and down the valley. If you do that and you drive people out of the valley and into the car parks, you start to generate the revenue that can support the more frequent bus services in any case.
So it sounds to me as though you like the vehicle tax idea. How do you feel about a bed tax?
Well, so I'd like to just zoom out now to 30,000 feet for a moment and say, well, what are we trying to... We've sort of got into the tax thing. I think I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about the philosophy of regenerative tourism.
I want to come to that, but I just want to ask whether, just because I'm going to encourage some people from the audience to ask questions or make comments in a minute, but we haven't just quite got the bed tax, vehicle tax. So if you answer that, and then I want to talk about what a different model.
Okay, so as I said a moment ago, the overnight stay charge is not currently possible under the law in England, although we suspect that it might be given as a power to the individual mayors. The Cumbria Mayor may be able to decide to levy an overnight stay charge as part of their powers. So that could come. The visitor vehicle charge is possible under the Transport Act 2000. And of course, the fear is, as we've just discussed, that it might stop people coming or it might discourage people. But we did a big piece of research with YouGov, the polling experts, and we polled 2,000 people, both residents and visitors. 68% of residents would support a charge and 64% of visitors would support a charge. So I think that was a useful piece of evidence to gather. So
people are beginning to get their heads around it.
Well, it puts to bed the kind of question, would it stop people coming? If you look at Venice, for example, they've got both an overnight stay charge and a day ticketing system, and their numbers are still going up.
Yeah. And actually, because Wales and Scotland can do this, it'd be really interesting to see, whether those powers were extended in a practical way to England as well.
Yeah.
So look, there's lots and lots of different ideas, and I'm really keen to hear from the audience. But just let's spend a few minutes on, and several of you have said, look, what is the issue we're trying to solve? And if you think, our pattern of tourism is very car dependent. It is still quite honeypot focused. People, look on TikTok, and I'm very conscious of this in the Peak District. They see the sunrise, up on Mantor, and 1,000 people want to see the sunrise on Mantor, which is a nightmare locally for both the community and the park authority. So it's a very sort of unsustainable model of quick grab, short-termism, quite resource intensive and very car dependent. So what would it look like if we had a different system? Do you have a vision for, Gavin, in your head for what sustainable tourism or regenerative tourism, a word that Mike just used?
Well, collectively we have a vision in Cumbria. We have a destination management plan that key public bodies have signed up to, and that vision starts with driving economic growth and making sure that we get that we protect and enhance the value to the economy of tourism, and extending that, making sure that we get more high paid and better jobs within our visitor economy, that we extend the average visitor spend and the average stay, so that sorry if I slip into technical terms here, but so we approach more slow tourism and you get people really appreciating, understanding and enjoying the Lake District. It's about being environmentally responsible and sustainable as well, and encouraging more and more businesses to adopt sustainable practices. And it's about being inclusive and being accessible and remaining a park for all, so that all aspects of society can come and enjoy the national park. Beyond that, what great looks like for me is when our visitors come and they forge a deeper connection with the place, that they really start to understand the Lake District and they go home inspired. That for me is when you start to get towards that definition of regenerative tourism, because it's when you get them into that frame of mind and that relationship with the place, that's when you start to get them giving back, either financially or even more interestingly through volunteering, micro-volunteering, the idea of leaving the place in a better state than you found it.
Do you like the idea of regenerative or slow tourism? Or
Yeah. I mean, I used the word balance earlier. I think what I'd like to see is more of the enormous amount of money that's made in the tourism sector filtering through to back into the local communities to support some of the infrastructure. So I think there's still some loopholes. So things like holiday lets don't pay council tax and they don't pay small business rates either. So they're effectively being subsidised by the locals right now. And that to me is a little loophole that could be closed. And then some of that money could be put back into the infrastructure and everything else. So there's just something about a little bit more going back in to fix things and make it easier on everybody. And yeah, so that, I mean, we talk about vibrant local communities. The National Park is one of your objectives, but I'd say Keswick is a vibrant place, but we're struggling on some things. And I think you see other communities starting to falter, and I think there's a point at which I think it's 25% of your accommodation being tourist accommodation. If it goes over that, it starts to undermine your community structure. We're at 33% right now.
Yeah.
So, and that's manifests in school roles, in all of that things. Yeah. So, you know, is it a tipping point right now? And I'd just like to push that tipping point back so that young people who grow up in Keswick stand a chance of actually even being able to. We have zero rental accommodation. I looked yesterday so I could be up to date. There were 2 properties available for rent, and the cheapest one was 1,100 a month, and the second one was 1,800 a month. Yeah. Which, when you have young people on minimum wage jobs, which is what
impossible.
So, it's about balance and actually saying these communities matter, because without the communities, you don't have people working in the shops and the restaurants,
or in the NHS, or in
for the council. I mean, it's
exactly.
And I think that's for the benefit of all. But right now, it just feels like a lot of that money is just floating off and not coming back.
That's such a common theme. What do you mean by regenerative?
Yeah, I wonder if I could sort of get a bit philosophical and borrow from regenerative agriculture, which is a concept that's fairly new. It's not as well defined as, say, organic farming, but regenerative agriculture values the soil above all else. And it's the opposite of what you could call industrial agriculture, which uses inputs, fertilizers, pesticides. It thrashes the soil for productivity, and eventually the soil is dead. You know, in some parts of the world where they practice intensive agriculture, there are maybe 20 or 30 harvests left before that soil is dead. And I worry that an extractive form of tourism is going to actually end up undermining tourism itself, killing the golden goose, as you said earlier. Yeah. So regenerative tourism would see the landscape in the same way as regenerative agriculture sees the soil. It would see the whole thing as an ecosystem, the landscape as an ecosystem, with tourism not as an industry or a sector, but as part of that ecosystem and responsible for its part in that ecosystem. And some of the micro behaviours, there are examples of embryonic regenerative tourism, I would say. You mentioned this, Gavin. We see some of our members booking holidays in the Lake District, if they live elsewhere, deliberately to coincide with the volunteering opportunities that we offer. So they'll come and they may spend 2 weeks, and some of that will be walking, but some of that will be building dry stone walls with us, or hedge laying with us,
really nice
which is incredible. So that's a micro volunteering opportunity.
On a business, Mike, there's a lot more we can collectively do to support and promote that, isn't there? And there's also opportunities for truly micro volunteering opportunities. The fact that our information centres, you can be offering litter pick, you can get them out there doing something productive that currently falls inordinately to local volunteers who do an incredible job, but you can really start to promote that. And I
Yeah.
think collectively we've got a job to do there.
And it's worth bigging up some of the businesses, tourism businesses that are doing the right thing. So the Quiet site over in Oldswater
Yes.
is incredible. You know, they've got reed beds for their sewage, they've got solar, they've got biomass boilers, they've got ground source heat pumps. You know, they are truly regenerative in terms of the ecology.
So we're beginning to get a feel for what things might look like, but who's got a view from the audience? I see one right here, but hold your hands up. So let's take a few, but first of all, yes, Mark from the Cumbria Tourist Board.
Hello panel, hello everyone. I'm Mark Holroyd, I'm the chair of Cumbria Tourism, our local visitor economy partnership. And firstly, I agree, and CT would agree with a lot of what's been said, and particularly you, Louise, around the funding model for local authorities in towns, in national parks, being totally judged on residents is a real weakness. You will understand that the tourism industry is concerned about the prospect of a visitor levy, whether that be on cars or on beds. In the moment, it is a particularly challenging time for all businesses, but the hospitality and tourism sector in particular. It may surprise some people to know that on the model that Cumbria Tourism has used for the last 20 years, the trend in visitor numbers since the pandemic and spend is still substantially down on the pre-pandemic period. 14% fewer visitors visiting Cumbria than prior to the pandemic, and I understand that the experience that we have and see may differ, but when we talk to some of our visitor attractions in particular, that does ring true in the experiences that we hear. So it's a challenging trading environment, and everybody knows about the economy at the moment and inflation and the challenges that we're experiencing. I'd also say that the difference. Mike explained his dreamy holiday in France, but the difference of implementing a bed tax in the UK compared to our European friends is around VAT. So those European countries have a lower VAT rate, and I think that this discussion would be quite different in the UK if hospitality VAT was lower, and then a local tax that's held locally was on top. It would be a very different conversation you'd be having with the industry. And just one final thing, which is that I do feel we already have a visitor tax that's held locally in our car parking revenue. And car parking revenue that is charged to the people that have an impact on the landscape through the use of private vehicles, that funds land managers directly, the National Park Authority directly, our local authorities directly. But I do agree, I do think there is a conversation that needs to be had before we leap to tourism taxes around how local authority car parking revenue is used in places like Keswick and
well, Louise has already...
Yeah, so people talk a lot about the car parks in Keswick, and you're right, they do bring in a lot of money. But we're part of a unitary authority that includes some of the most deprived parts of the UK. And Cumberland has a responsibility to provide services across the whole of Cumberland. Now, morally, if someone has to choose between social care for the elderly and supporting the tourist industry, I know which I would choose. Yeah. So it's a tricky one. There isn't enough money in local government to continue to support. And I think the VAT thing, I get that, but everyone said they're happy to pay more anyway. So and also numbers aren't down in Keswick, because on your most recent survey, they were up 5%. You didn't put that in your press release. So.
Okay, I'm going to get some more questions. So there's one I'm going to take a couple, actually. One at the halfway down, and one here, please. So can we take the next two and just tell us what you think? Yeah.
Thank you. And I read the Who Pays for the Lakes report earlier this year. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Look, you've talked a lot about the problems, the congestion, the lack of money. You've got a supply-demand imbalance. I absolutely reject the notion that there is a lack of demand for the Lake District, 18 million visitors already.
Yeah.
You've got the golden goose, you're not catching the eggs that are popping out, right? so what I find perplexing about everything I've heard, and you've all really articulated a lot of the problems and the challenges really well, is you're not talking about how you're actually going to implement a solution. You've got ANPR if you want to do road pricing. It's not hard, right? Yes, you've got issues around how the money gets spent. You've got a unitary authority now. You've got combined county council. Who's going to take the lead on this? Who's going to say, right, this is the solution and this is what we're going to go and do, and get on with it?
Great question. I'm going to get the other question first. Great question. You're going to have your chance to answer, but this gentleman here. Just speak, I think. It'll come on.
Oh, right. Sorry. I must ask your pardon. I'm from Yorkshire. So I've lived here for
That's
15 years. But I came from very near York. Now, I don't know if any of you ever have tried visiting York. It's got a bit better recently since they were far-sighted enough to put quite a few park and rides around York. Now, I'm not saying you've got to use them. You haven't got to force people into them. And I don't know what the proportion of day visitors to people who are staying for a week is coming to Cumbria. But for the people who come for the day, it's a total waste of time. Now, I live at Troutbeck Bridge, and frequently it can take an hour and a half to get from me up into Ambleside, in the summer. It's just hopeless.
Yeah.
So if you were coming for the day, you'd have wasted the entire day, and you would advise people never to come again, you know. So what I'm saying is you should set up, there's plenty of set-aside land at Plumgarths and places, the main entry points to the Lake District. Ask the farmer to give you the field for a while.
Oh, controversial.
Yeah, but I mean, you spent a lot of time.
All right, you got the point. Thank you. That's brilliant.
You spent a lot of time refusing car parking facilities up here.
Okay,
but I think a few more.
No, yes, all right. We've got the point.
Yeah.
I'm going to get. So the first question was like, just get on with it. What and who's going to lead? So, and the second question is actually there are solutions. York, new car parks. What are the arguments? Gavin, you go first.
So I'll deal with the car parking. I'm personally very committed and keen to explore. I wouldn't necessarily designate it as or describe it as park and ride, but the idea of strategic parking sites at the entry points to the national park, particularly where we can tie them in with the existing bus network, the 555, the 55, whatever, I'm really keen to explore that, and we are in active discussions with some landowners. I can't say much more than that at this point, and I think that will be part of the solution. In terms of building car parks within the national park, I think that does get a bit more problematic. We do have a car parking policy that will support new car parks, and we have approved new car parks over the last year or two, but we want and require them to be within or well connected to existing service settlements so that it reduces the landscape harm, and we want them to have a reasonable probability of people then using them to use sustainable or active transport to go on. Where they appear in the local, in the outlying countryside and in some of the hotspots that really irk people, and I do understand the frustration, I visit them myself, but there's plenty of evidence out there that if we simply build more car parks, you won't solve the problem, you'll just increase the demand and the people will continue to park. We have to find alternative solutions out in the hotspots and the open countryside. But I do fully support the idea of strategic car parking sites at the entry points to the park.
And the point about actually we need to get on now. Clearly, getting on with it it's got lots of elements to it. But I think the sense was, can we not set up some kind of working group or some kind of partnership to explore? Would the park be willing to lead that?
Well, through the partnership, we're certainly the new partnership plan will be out for consultation shortly, and one of the action points is to look at a plan to develop a vision and a much clearer plan for improvements to sustainable transport. That'll be one of the ambitions. In terms of implementing a congestion charge, there's nobody on this stage that's got any powers to do that. That falls to the two unitary authorities. And in terms of a bed tax, nobody in England has the power to do that at the moment. So it isn't as simple as get on and do it.
Okay, Louise.
Well,
Louise,
I'd like to thank Friends of the Lake District for really kicking this off. The report, Who Pays for the Lake District, I'm assuming lots of people have read it. It's really good, and I think it's changed the discussion. I now see people talking about some kind of tourist levy as a realistic possibility, whereas before it was just pushed away. And I think there's an opportunity now, and you're right, it does. We need the councils as well. They need to be on this stage next time we do one of these. But yeah, I think we've reached that tipping point now where, and other places are doing it. Liverpool's doing it, Edinburgh's doing it. We might have powers to do it soon. So I'm with the gentleman over there who says we should get the right people together. But I think Friends of the Lake District have really pushed on this, and I think they've changed the environment for the debate. That's my feeling anyway, so thank you.
So it was worth waiting for that, wasn't it?
Well, to the point about just get on and do it, I saw a great quote the other day. It said, leadership is about poetry and plumbing. And I think what it means is you need to set a vision for something, say what you want to achieve, which I think we all have an idea of in terms of transport. But you can't just use magical thinking and hope that a bag of cash is going to drop from the sky to fund it. You need to do the plumbing. You need to get on and work out how it's going to be delivered. And there was a really brilliant piece of work done, chaired by Michael Carter, by a task and finish group at the Lake District National Park Partnership level recently, which came up with a report on sustainable funding models for sustainable transport. One of the recommendations was that we should look into visitor vehicle charge and what it would cost and how it might work. Not that we should implement it, but we should do more research on it.
Yeah.
And that, I'm afraid, has been squashed largely by the business community, who are afraid of any form of visitor levy. So there are some of us trying to just get on with it, but it is quite difficult. I think it will fall to the Cumbria Mayor, though, whoever that is, to make a decision on this. So we need to sort of turn our guns in that direction and make sure that we're trying to convince them. So I would actually urge you all to look at the National Park Partnership Plan when it's out for consultation very shortly. It's the plan for the next 5 years of the Lake District. It's what Gavin will use as his Bible for the Park Authority. And if you think it's unambitious in transport funding, say so.
Right, two more questions, one here and one here, and I think there'll be some further back in a minute. Yes, let's take these two. Thank you. The other one's just here on my right. Yeah, go first, yeah.
I represent the Green Party. Some years ago, I went to an excellent conference run by Friends of the Lake District, in which you were looking at alternative visions of tourism. And one of the sort of test cases you looked at was a very narrow valley, I think, in Austria. And part of their thinking, and the whole thinking of the conference, was how to make coming here, not just being in the Lake District, but arriving in the Lake District, part of the adventure. And they were talking about electric bikes. They were talking about using the lakes, the transport on the lakes, obviously the small public transport, the minibuses and all the rest of it. But the whole idea was to try and make people think, I'm not just going to go park my car and then walk. I'm actually going to do something right from the beginning.
That's
brilliant.
That's what when I say regenerative tourism, sees that visitor experience as part of the landscape ecosystem. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. We've lived in Keswick for the last 5 years. Love Keswick, always have done. We're not against tourists by any means, but I think we have reached saturation point. And just say, for instance, there was a tourist levy. What needs to change now to see some of that coming back to the local communities? Because, yeah, a swimming pool we definitely need, but, you know, the hospital is underfunded, the local hospital, various, you know, GPs, dentists, etc. There are a lot of things, you know, I have mobility issues and we don't have enough dropped pavements. I have to travel on the road a lot of the time. And I think if some of those things were addressed, locals would feel a lot better, you know, about living here. Yes, we're very lucky, but certainly the pressure feels very great on residents a lot of the time.
So there is a real issue then about where the money can be recycled to.
I think when you talk to people about a tourist levy, the next thing they say is, as long as it comes back to improve that local community, because the fear is that there'll be a tourist levy and it'll just disappear, like the business rates disappear and the car park money disappears. It has to be allocated to that area to improve the services in that area for locals and for tourists, to reduce that pressure. And I think that's the key thing. And actually, I think that's part of that's one of the things that it says in the report about who pays for the Lake District. It can't just be collected and then nobody sees any benefit.
But we haven't yet got the legislative framework to allow that to happen.
No, so as we discussed, some sort of visitor vehicle charge, the revenues from that would have to go back into transport and mobility. So that could make the buses better in Keswick, it could make the footpaths better, it could do your drop curbs, absolutely, it could make new cycle paths as well. So yes, an upside for Keswick. An overnight stay charge, the question is who collects it, and there's different models around the world, and Edinburgh has the council collecting it. In other parts of the country, Manchester, Liverpool, the tourism businesses themselves have clubbed together and decided to effectively levy an overnight stay charge, but that money is almost exclusively then used for destination management, for tourism purposes. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Who collects the money and how is it spent is critical.
Yeah, and critical to build public support. Now we've got some more hands right at the back. There's one there, lovely, and is there another one? Yep, just behind you, lovely. Hello.
Good evening, panel. I wondered if we could talk about another issue, which is preservation of heritage and culture. Now, I'm no Luddite, but Elterby is on my doorstep, and I don't think people are coming to go in a zip wire, and I'm sorry to address that, but how important is it that we preserve the heritage and culture, which is in fact part of the World Heritage status? Now, that's very difficult to balance with travellers coming in, visitors in excess, but people come for that, I'm quite sure. And I'm no Luddite, I'm all for change, but how do we balance that? Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a question just in front, yeah?
I wanted to pick up the concept of sustainable tourism as a take from sustainable agriculture. So I work in the conservation sector, and sustainable agriculture is something that I think about quite a lot, because the implication of it is that it's a universally accessible idea, and I don't think it is in the current consumptive world that we have. So effectively, a sustainable agricultural approach employed in the current format would require that some of the world, and whether it be some of England, some of the UK, some of Europe, or some other parts of the world, have to carry the burden for providing the consumption that we as a global society have, whilst other bits don't. So to transfer that into the argument for tourism, how do we ethically wrangle with the idea that A, we have to change the behaviours of people coming here, but B, more importantly, if we are successful, are we not effectively saying we are special and everyone else isn't? How do we deal with that statement, and where we outsource poor behaviour, bad treatment of the world around us to other bits of the world?
That's such an interesting question, and actually quite linked to the first question. We haven't talked much about the World Heritage Site in specific terms, but I mean there are huge obligations that go with the World Heritage Site, which are about sustainability and people and communities, particularly because we work so hard to get the Lake District recognised as a cultural landscape, not a nature or a built landscape. So you might have thoughts on all of that, Mike. Those are really challenging questions.
That's a really interesting one about the heritage and culture. I think I would use the Elter Water Quarry proposal as an example. So what was proposed there was a development by the company Zip World, which in our view was a kind of thinly veiled attempt to suggest that it was a heritage attraction because people might learn a bit about quarrying while they were there, but actually if you look at their website, Zip World market everything as an adrenaline adventure. It's an adrenaline adventure at the end of the day. We would not be against an attraction at Elter Water Quarry that took people round and showed them respectfully that quarrying heritage, which is part of the cultural heritage of the Lake District. It's the fact that they had to dress it up with zip wires that made it, in UNESCO's view, inappropriate. So I think that sort of comes back to the regenerative tourism model that I talked about earlier, where it's about making sure that the tourism experience respects the landscape.
I think it's probably right. I come in at
I
that
think
point.
so.
It's going to get fairly provocative at this point. I wasn't expecting Elterwater particularly, but well, I think we've got to deal with the application that was actually considered by our Development Control Committee. So the first point is this is not a big long zip line across Elterwater. The imagery used by the mainstream media I don't think is particularly helpful, because it takes Europe's longest zip line, I think, in Wales, run by Zip World. And it presents it as the imagery for the development at Elterwater. There is no above ground zip line at Elterwater. It's all below ground. It's all within the caverns, within the quarrying cave itself. And in truth, it's a series of platforms that link different elements of the quarried cave out. It's closer to via ferrata as much as it is as a zip line. And what they then do is tell a story about the cultural heritage. Now, there's different appetites and different tastes for how you tell stories, and times change, absolutely. And personally, I wouldn't be going on a zip line to learn about quarrying simply because as I get older, my vertigo gets worse and worse. But I don't think it should be for all of us to determine how younger audiences enjoy and engage and absorb cultural heritage. And I do think there was in the public domain a bit of misunderstanding about what the actual proposal was. I think it's right, Zip World do market themselves as an adrenaline company, and they do try and attract an adventurous audience. But I don't know if you've been to any of their, have you been to their deep quarry, their deep mine tour, etc. down in Wales? It's genuinely worth going. That is honestly an emotional experience as part of the wider experience. And yes, there's nets that kids bounce on, but then there's young people there who take you down their deep mine tour. And it is humbling and emotional as they speak about their fathers, their grandparents, their great-grandparents working in that quarry, and they tell you about that experience and how Wales and how Snowdonia was shaped. It's genuinely moving. So I don't think we should be too dismissive of them as a company because of how they market their wares, which are really, really attractive to a certain audience. And I certainly don't think it's for me to start to dictate how people consume and enjoy culture. And I do want to be clear about what the development proposal that was actually approved was.
Both had your say on Elterwater, and I'm going to draw a line on Elterwater.
Very wise.
I am really interested in the World Heritage Site and the cultural landscape, and whether, you know, and this is not about a particular application at all, it's about the opportunity to really demonstrate globally that this is one of the most significant cultural landscapes in the world, which shaped by human endeavour, whether that was mining or farming or other traditional crafts, and actually how that could be used. I'm just going back to our second question there about the deeper philosophical questions around regenerative processes, and whether you feel, how confident you feel we are at capturing the really big opportunity that
I think there's miles more to do to tell the World Heritage story to our visitors. Absolutely. We've got a wonderful World Heritage toolkit that helps to tell the story and explain it. But I think right across the Lake District, we've got a bigger job to do to tell that story and engage people with what makes it such a special place. And that's not just the natural environment, it is the cultural heritage, it's the industrial heritage. But in truth, some of the biggest threats to World Heritage Site status and the cultural designation can sit outside of the tourism debate, quite frankly, and it's around our hefted flocks, our farming traditions, it's around green lanes. There are a range of things that UNESCO are concerned about. And I suppose where it does come back to tourism, and where we share some really strong views, me and Louise, which is about maintaining your working age population and maintaining core communities. And I think the growth of short-term lets, to make sure I don't get sued by any major corporations that facilitate short-term lets, the growth of Airbnbs and the growth of second homes, I think, present a real and present danger to the vibrancy of those communities. And we do advocate strongly for change in that area. We've advocated with central government for a change of use class, which would mean that when you moved a residential dwelling from out of traditional residential status, as we all understand it, into use as short-term holiday let, that would require planning consent from us as the planning authority, which would allow us to start to control it.
Yeah.
And government are now introducing a registration scheme which will help us get a handle on just how big an issue it is in the Lake District.
I'm going to bring 2 more questions in. I'm sure, Louise, you'll be back. There's one here and one just there as well. Yes, carry on. Yeah, lovely.
I live in Windermere. There are several problems which range from there are parking facilities, but people don't want to pay for parking, so they park on residential streets, which turns two-lane residential streets into single lanes with no passing.
Seen it.
Our housing stock, anything that's built of stone, goes as a holiday cottage. And I live on a street that used to be 100% residential when I moved in 30-odd years ago. And is now 50% residential. And we have the similar problems to the lady who said she lives next to a party house.
Yeah.
We have those kind of problems. And the people who rent the party house feel entitled to scream and abuse at the resident next door who needs to get up for work in the morning. Also, I think a huge part of it needs to be education. I don't think there's nearly enough education in our area for the tourists. You go if you go to a residential self-catering let in Torquay, there's an information pack that tells you all the local services that insists that you do your recycling. That does not happen here. Instead, they fill their black bins to overflowing because people buy too much food and they leave it all behind and the cleaners clean it out and it just fills the bin. Nothing gets recycled. They don't recycle their wine bottles, their milk bottles. They just don't. There's no information in any of the self-catering accommodation, and it should be compulsory for self-catering, whether it's a keypad bedroom in an ex-B&B or whatever, that should tell you how to responsibly behave in the Lake District.
That's a great point.
To not leave your barbecues on a fair.
Okay, the lady in front, and then I think Louise will, I'm sure, want to respond to that. Oh, this way, sorry, we'll come back to you. Yeah. Yes?
If we're going to change public opinion, if you like, a business opinion about maybe a levy on vehicles or a tourist tax, I think first of all we need to think about transport for residents and workers as well as for tourists. I think that people need to see a vision of what a sustainable, integrated, affordable public transport system would look like, what they would get for their money. And I think if the National Park or the local authorities or the transport authorities could come up with such a clear vision, you know, integrated public transport. I live in Ambleside. The first bus in the morning gets to Windermere Station 10 minutes after the first train goes south. Somebody arriving at one of the peripheral car parks, they should be able to buy a ticket that took them on, whether it's a stagecoach bus, a train, a minibus in one of the outlying valleys or so on, a single ticket. There should be an app that they could just put in, how do I get from Windermere to Wasdale? If that vision was there, people would know what they would be getting and perhaps it would begin to sell the idea.
Two great points, two great contributions. Louise, you go first.
Yeah. So I think on short-term holiday lets, I would like to see the same kind of regulation as you have for an HMO. And similar kind of regulations you see in Europe.
Everyone, I'm sure, knows what an HMO is.
Sorry, a house of multiple occupancy. So to get a license, so at the moment you can just set up a holiday let. There's no licensing, and therefore there's no kind of you can't take the license away if that becomes a problem property. Now, if you have a problem HMO, your license will be taken off you by the council. The system is there. It can be picked up and used for short-term holiday lets. Now, that would benefit the neighbourhoods. It would also benefit the people who stay in holiday lets, because I've stayed in holiday lets where, frankly, some of the electrics is a bit, because that's not very regulated either. It's a bit guidance-y rather than regulated in the way long-term lets and HMOs would be. So that to me seems like a really good idea that would help with some of those things. On the transport, the buses between, sorry, I'm being very Keswick here, But the bus to Penrith, to the station, used to go every hour, and occasionally they wouldn't turn up, so that would be 2 hours you'd be standing at the bus stop. They changed the buses to every half an hour, and it's transformed it. So now you can go and get the train on the bus, and that's what everyone is doing. It's killed the local taxi business, though, I have to say. That's been a problem for them. But now when you arrive at Penrith Station, it's very confusing in the station because it says that there's a train to Keswick, which of course there isn't. It's just because they've linked up the train with the bus. So it can be done, and I guess that's Cumberland's done that. So Westmoreland and Furness, we get back to having 2 councils in the same area. But that has worked incredibly well. And I sometimes think this whole thing feels massive. It's like eating an elephant, but it's just one thing at a time to just ease things. Because, things like that bus to Penrith's made a big difference to the people of Keswick, to the locals. They can get to work. We'd love to see something out to Workington, because a lot of people that live in Workington and the West Coast, we could have more of those buses. That would be great too. So things can be done, and some of the solutions are there, and I'm just a bit perplexed sometimes as to why some of the, and often it's the council, but what we're doing as a town council is we're very vocal on behalf of our residents. I'm constantly, well, you guys know, don't you?
but can I just ask about the parking? This thing about parking.
Residents parking.
Yes, so residents parking.
Start lobbying for a residents parking
Who
scheme.
implements residents parking?
The council. So we have problems on the back streets of Keswick, very similar to what you were talking about, dangerous parking on corners. They're double yellowing all the corners. It's been very controversial. B&B owners aren't very happy because it's less free parking for their customer group. Holiday lets, people don't know because they all live somewhere else. So that's been a bit controversial, but that's coming in because it was dangerous. You couldn't get the bin lorries down, you couldn't get an ambulance down. It's been terrible. So that's happening, and then the next step will be a consultation over bringing in residents parking in those streets. So get onto the council, harass them.
There is a sort of bring it on feel in the room around some of these tools that we do have, which seem disconcertingly slow to implement.
Sorry, the other thing I'd say is if you've got problems with overflowing bins, report it as fly tipping. I do that every time. I'm constantly reporting things because the more reports your council gets, the more resource they will put into fixing it.
Great, good. Right, there's one there and one here. Oh, this one here. Okay, sorry. There's so many people. We've got to keep getting the questions in. Yes.
So we've heard from that gentleman over there about someone just get on and do it.
Yeah.
Edinburgh City Council first approved the tourist levy in 2019. It's coming in next year.
Taking a while.
If we're not even at the point where there's someone leading on this, you could hazard a guess at a decade until what you're talking about is implemented.
Okay.
So what's happening now?
Okay.
And you could say some of the car parks that have been rejected over the past couple of years may have even featured in a sustainable transport system, and then they're already like that car park could already be your park and ride hub.
Yeah. Great question. There was one here.
Yeah, we're talking as friends of the Lake District, but I think most of this seems to be about the Lake District National Park. Now we're sitting
all the local authorities, actually.
We're not in the Lake District now. So my question really is, those of us who live in the Lake District but not in the park, nevertheless regard ourselves as Lake District people, do these transport levies extend to us, or a tradesman in Kendal who wants to go and do a job in Ambleside, is he going to be levied?
Yeah, so our YouGov poll that I talked about earlier showed a small majority in favour of a visitor vehicle charge over a bed tax. So that's the model that we're now progressing, and a ton more research needs to be done on how that might work. But we agree that there should be exemptions for locals, so it is a visitor vehicle charge, and you can define what locals means in many different ways. You could sort of draw a radius around it and say that anyone, or you could say anyone in Cumbria doesn't have to pay it. I mean, there's a number of different ways you could cut it. You could also make it seasonal, and you could make it variable according to the types of vehicles. So you could charge camper vans big recreational vehicles much more than you charge a small electric car. So yes is the answer. We think people on business, people doing trade, locals should be exempt from a visitor vehicle charge.
One here.
I wanted to follow on to what my friend said here, that it is an education thing.
Yeah.
And the education thing would cost none of the authorities very much money. We all know there's TikTok, Instagram, and numerous social media platforms that I'm totally unaware of. But that could be implemented, the tourist information centres. If this sort of behaviour, good behaviour, could be promoted, I don't think a lot of the people are deliberately unfeeling, they're just unaware. Ignorance is bliss. They don't know that what they're doing is impacting other people. So influencers, social media, could perhaps go down the route of saying, yes, you do need to do this. Perhaps parking there isn't appropriate.
You picked up that, Gavin, earlier, because you said it wasn't the people you were worried about, it was their behaviour. So what's your answer to...
Yeah, absolutely. We're passionate about it being a park for all, as I'm sure virtually everyone in the room is. It's not the visitors I want to discourage at all. It's certain, and it's a small minority of people who exhibit troubling behaviours, but it's those behaviours we have to address. And I do think education is a big part of it. I think there'll be a hardcore minority where it's fairly willful, but I think a lot of it does stem from a lack of education, a lack of understanding about how to behave in the outdoors. We have done some of that work across this summer. We've already done that. We've got our own social media channels that we're very active. We work with partners to push messages, but we're acutely aware that some of the audiences, at least, that we're trying to reach, potentially younger people, they're not following the Twitter accounts of Cumberland and Westmoreland councils, as great as they are. And even though I'm a bit more glamorous, they're not really following the Twitter or Instagram feeds of the National Park Authority either.
Let's all follow, Gavin.
So what we've done is work directly with influencers. We've reached out, we've found ones that have high followings and high interactions, and we've had commercial arrangements with them. I think it was covered in the local press in any case, but we've set up arrangements so that they start sending positive messages to their followers. That's been controversial. Some people see that as a waste of public money, effectively, when you're paying influencers to spread positive messages. But I think it's genuinely the best way of reaching some of the people that we need to reach. So we need to consider about how we grow that, how we amplify that, and how we grow those relationships.
We have to get it across that, yes, you have a right to come to this national park, but that brings with it responsibilities.
Yeah. I do think, sorry to add in again, I think a lot of it is, they think it's a park, therefore it has park keepers who pick up the rubbish and tidy up the rushes, and they don't realise that that's them.
Yeah, no, and
people going around at 6 o'clock, turning the lights off and picking up rubbish, that doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that. They think it's a national park, that they can do anything they like, climb the walls, swing on the gates, whatever it is. They don't know, and we aren't telling them enough.
I think behavioural change is incredibly difficult and actually really very expensive to do. I see education campaigns. My career was in communications, and I see people say, oh, we've got an education campaign, and it's basically like the Countryside Code was relaunched, and it was basically shoved on a website somewhere, and that was it. And I think these things have to, do we all remember them? Is it Marjorie, the adverts when I was a kid with sitting in a, does anyone remember these adverts? Where she'd eat an apple and she'd throw it over and then it would hit a cow or something, and it was, so, I mean, again, it's this government funding. There's something around funding for this education, because it just doesn't happen. And I think at the moment, because of social media, everyone goes, the minute they posted something on a website, they think the job's done, and it isn't. And I think it's really hard to get people to change their behaviour.
And a lot of this is about children, not just the children in school, children at home, being not just encouraged but told about the behaviours that will work.
Actually, it's adults as well. There's a lot of very badly behaved 50-somethings.
I'm not saying the behaviours, but unless you start with the child. Now, we haven't got very long left, so I'm really conscious. There's quite a lot of people wanting to speak, so let's grab a few more. Can you speak briefly, and we'll take 3 or 4.
comment first. I'm surprised that some sort of entry charge or vehicle tax has to be linked to the Transport Act. Surely we can address that in some way. But the question I wanted to ask, and it perhaps relates to the Lake District Partnership, is it would be very nice if we could raise 20, 30, 40 million, but it's how that's going to be spent, because there'll be all sorts of conflicting demands on it. I'm particularly interested in housing, but it will be all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think that's come up regularly as the biggest challenge. But yeah, we could lobby for change in Westminster. Another one here, yeah. Let's take a few.
I just wanted to ask the panel, ask the gentleman from the Tourist Board via the panel, who said with some regret, I think, that tourist numbers now are 14% lower than they were pre-COVID. I just, implied in that is that he'd like it to increase up to 100% and more. So my question is there ever a way that we could say enough and no more? In all the elements we're talking about, traffic, sewage, cars, car parking, wearing out the fells, what have you. Is there any way we might ever say in Cumbria?
Very interesting question. I think the park might have thought of that question before, but thank you. I'll bring you in a moment, Mark, but let's get a couple more, because I'm so conscious lots of people want to speak. Who's next? Yeah, there's one behind you, actually. Yeah, lovely. And put your hands up again so I can see how many there are. There's a lady here, so we'll take you two. Yeah.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed and valued the report which has led to tonight's conference, and I've really valued the contribution of our friends from Windermere who are resident. The single most powerful piece of that report for me was the man who, you could tell from his T-shirt, worked for the Hospitality Distribution Centre, McClure's in Windermere, who said he was a working class man who didn't belong there anymore. And I thought that was so powerful, because Windermere is a big enough place that it's still got its schools, its GP services, its public transport, but there's a great deal of a great number of communities that are being really hollowed out. And I wonder what that man would have said if he was on tonight's panel, what his contribution would have been to the discussion that we've had in this room tonight.
No, it really...
And the link point to that is I live in the Lake District National Park, but I live all of 400, 500 metres into the National Park in a thriving village with a very small amount of tourist infrastructure. And I think we have to be careful about blanket policies affecting the whole of the park, because if you put vehicle taxes and bed charges in, all you're going to do is shut my local, and I'd rather you didn't do that.
The lady here.
Hello, I'd like to say something, I live in Ambleside. I'd like to say something in favour of road tax, bring up that again, versus a tourist levy, a point which I don't think has been made so far. And that is that my understanding is that a high proportion of people that arrive in the Lake District are people who arrive for the day, drive to the Lake District and drive out again later that afternoon or that evening. And I think you can see where I'm coming from. If you have a road tax that would include them as well, or could potentially include them selectively, as has been discussed before. But if it was a tourist levy on B&Bs and the like, then those people would be exempt.
Yeah.
And so a large proportion of visitors who actually maybe do cause the problems that we've been mentioning would be completely exempt.
Yeah, I think that's probably where the FLD points. Now, there was a gentleman right at the back who put his hand up very strongly. There we go. Have you got a mic somewhere for him? And then I'm going to ask our panel with the final thoughts with Mark's as well. It's been such a good debate. I wish could have gone on all night. Hello.
Thank you. Gavin, you've
and question for the whole panel, but Gavin, you mentioned a number of times about the parks for everyone. Research over the last few years, and research recently from Leicester University, has shown that a lot of people, particularly from racially diverse backgrounds, both people who live here and visit here, are actually excluded and marginalised from these areas. So you talk about regenerative tourism and sustainable tourism. The question to everybody, how can you make sure that whatever happens is actually inclusive for everyone and not excludes people? Because my worry is this will be another way of excluding those marginalised groups who can't access the national park. And as you mentioned, it's about health and well-being and connected with nature. And a lot of activities, somebody talked about volunteering on the panel there as well, I think Mike and Gavin. A lot of the volunteering opportunities are weekdays. They're not at weekends, so professionals and young people cannot access them. So if you want to connect people and make them inclusive, you need to do a lot more work. I think there's a lot of structural changes need to be done to become more inclusive rather than trying to tinker around the edges.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great question. Great question. Now look, we've got very little time left. I'm going to ask you to be really brief, but not obviously to answer every point. But just Mark, just very briefly, you first. Is there a mic for Mark? You were challenged. Do you want loads more people, and isn't enough enough?
So our Cumbria Tourism's plan is not about growth for growth's sake. It's about spreading the economic benefits of tourism across the year and across the county, so that we're spreading visitors and their economic impact to those less visited areas, and also to grow the proportion of overnight stays. So an overnight visitor, particularly in serviced accommodation, and I agree with Louise's points about the need for short-term letting to be more regulated, spends considerably more and has a much, much more positive impact on our local economy. So I don't want to necessarily, it's not about getting back to 100%, but it is about spreading those benefits more widely. But where I do urge some caution is that there are some of our cultural and heritage attractions, and I was in Grasmere this week with one who their numbers and their viability is really challenged, and it is for a number of these attractions. So we need to make sure that we're using visitors to sustain those things.
All right, thank you, Mark. Very good. So, Louise, Gavin, and Mike, just a very short final thought.
Oh. So, I suppose it's a bit of I'd make a plea to the audience, actually, to be activists. I'm making an assumption here, this is our community, and I think if we don't fight for it, no one else is going to. So, try and get involved, volunteer. Are the binfluencers here, the Keswick binfluencers? Oh, maybe the weather didn't. Yes, they thought you were here, yeah. You know, a great group of people who go out litter picking and calling out influencers on there. That's why they call themselves the binfluencers. So, you know, I think there's a lot we can do as a community, and I think a lot of people look to the National Park, Gavin always in the hot seat, you know, the stuff that we can do and ideas that we have, you know, put them forward, go to your parish councils, your local councils, and then we can take them, we can bother Gavin with them then. You know, so get involved and don't give up, because I think a lot of people have given up and they're just feeling like they're going to move.
Can I just very quickly say, you know, I'd really like to be able to be in touch with people who are, I'd like residents to be able to get in touch with people who are making these decisions. Is there going to be a forum for that?
Okay, well, we'll come back to you on that, because I think one of the big questions is who's convening who, and Gavin, you are a bit in the hot seat for that with your consultation, the vision, opportunity. What do you say to all of this?
Well, certainly I'd echo Mike's point that we would really welcome feedback when we go out to consultation on the partnership plan. There's no point having a consultation unless we welcome feedback and we act on it. So I'd encourage everyone, and equally for you to encourage people far and wide to respond to that consultation and give us your thoughts. I'd really like to echo Louise's points as well, because if we can all chip in, we can volunteer, we can look after our own special place, that makes a big difference. We can lead by example, can't we? But equally, a lot of these decisions are taken democratically. We live in a democracy. Even the Park Authorities Board, we have 20 people on our board, 10 of them are appointed by the Secretary of State, but 10 of them come from Westmoreland and Furness Council or Cumberland Council or your local parish councils. Democratic engagement is a really important part of the process, and that's what shapes decision making.
So get involved in the consultations, look on the website, see what's being discussed and respond.
Yeah.
Mike?
I'd say your voice counts, and eventually your vote will count too for Cumbria Mayor. So keep looking out for the visionary people who can do the poetry and the plumbing. Do they have a plan for getting the money? And do respond to the consultation, please. Have a read. It's as Gavin says, it's your democratic right to get involved in that and feed back to the powers that be about how you want this place, this brilliant landscape, to be managed in the future. And of course, you should join Friends of the Lake District.
Good pitch. So, what a fantastic evening we've had. I just want to thank you all for your questions. I mean, there's more questions than we could ever have wanted, and still loads to talk about. I think what we've heard, though, is a real desire to tackle some of these problems, particularly those from the communities that are feeling under most pressure, Windermere, Ambleside, Keswick. And actually, it's not just about tourism taxes, whether it's vehicle or bed taxes, it's also about getting the basics right. I love the point that was made about just getting people to know what they're supposed to do in the community, you know, the recycling and the behaving in a way that respects the local community. So lots of practical ideas, but I think there's also an appetite, isn't there, to not wait 10 years for something to happen, but to get talking about what the options are. And obviously the Park Authority is a great position to curate and help that conversation, but you as individuals, us as individuals, are all in a great position to do our bit. So thank you for coming. Thank you for Friends of the Lake District for hosting and organising tonight. And thank you to our amazing panel for being so brilliant and responsive tonight. Thank you very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a final word, just to reiterate what Fiona said there. Thank you all for coming. It's been a hugely interesting and enriching debate. This isn't the start, neither is it the end, but it has been an important moment. We at Friends of the Lake District have captured and heard and listened today, and we will be carrying on developing our own thinking, so do watch this space. To reiterate again from our perspective as well, many thanks to our panellists and to our chair, so to Fiona Reynolds, Gavin Capstick and Louise Dunn, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming, for listening, for participating, for your questions. We are very grateful for you for being here. We're very grateful to all of our members and supporters. As you pass on your way, do have a look at our calendars, Christmas cards. We're particularly pleased with our calendars this year. They really are very striking. So with that, many thanks again for coming and safe journey home.